it's a time when us artists have to say we have to fight, but also fight including against the censorship, and largely the censorship which is supporting and reinforcing the fascism that's here.
Familia, welcome back to Nilk's second season of the Freedom to Thrive podcast, Resistance, Justice, and Resilience. And I'm your host, Hector Flores. Today's conversation is about art, power, and what it really means to be free in a moment where fear is being weaponized against our communities. We're going to talk about courage and the power of collective resistance to fight fascism. So strap up, because it's going to be a good conversation. Today's guests sit right at the intersection of resistance, culture, and justice. Our first guest is a world-renowned artist whose work has challenged white supremacy, patriotism, and state violence for decades. Our second guest, fierce immigrant rights advocate who helped shape the legal and moral fight for dignity and due process every single day. So let's start the show. Boom! Our first guest today, legendary artist and activist Dred Scott. For more than 30 years, Dred has created work that refuses to let America look away from its own contradictions. From slavery to policing, from wars to censorship, from nationalism to state violence. Many people first learn his name through his groundbreaking and controversial piece titled, "What is the Proper Way to Display a U.S. Flag?" A work that ignited a national conversation, a firestorm. It drew condemnation from a sitting president and permanently altered the conversation about art and free expression in this country. But Dred's work doesn't stop at provocation. It pushes us to imagine a world beyond exploitation, a world beyond borders, a world beyond fear. He is also one of the organizers of what we're calling the Fall of Freedom, where artists across the country are using arts as a form of resistance against censorship and authoritarianism. Dred Scott, brother, welcome to the Freedom to Thrive podcast. How you doing?
Hector, thank you. I'm doing good. I mean, the world's a mess, but my tiny little slice of it's doing okay. So,
but I've been reading a lot about your work, and I love how you reimagine and sort of rethink the ideas of what freedom means, of what patriotism means. Like, these are words that folks use every day, right? Yeah. But depends who you talk to and depends what communities and folks, everybody has a different idea of what that means. Yeah. You've been doing this work for over 3 decades, man. One of your early projects was titled, "What is the Proper Way to Display a U.S. Flag?" It got national attention, and even the president spoke about it. Can you share about the project for listeners who are not familiar with it?
So the work that's in question is a work called "What is the Proper Way to Display a U.S. Flag?" And when I say I'm an artist, I mean, a lot of people on a podcast will think, oh, he's an artist. He does paintings or drawings or something like that. And I do that too. But I work in a range of different media. Some of it's painting and drawing, but some of it's screen printing. Some of it is sculpture. Some of it's, installation art. And that might be a term that, people are less familiar with, but that's like sculpture that more takes up sort of a room or something like that. Some of my work's photography. But the thing is that I sometimes do work that's more performance-based and has the audience as a participant. And people say, like, what's your medium? You do oil on canvas. Well, some of my work, actually, the audience is part of the medium. And so with a work called What is the Proper Way to Display a U.S. Flag, it had 3 sort of components to it. One was a photo montage, or sort of a collage, but it was all on one piece of paper. A photo montage on the wall that had text that says, "What's the proper way to display a U.S. flag?" And below that was a picture of South Korean students burning American flags that said, holding signs that said, "Yankee, go home, son of a bitch." And below that were coffins draped in American flags coming back from Vietnam in a troop transport. So that was the photo montage. Below that on the wall was a shelf that had books on them that were originally blank, that people could respond to the question that was the title of the work. And below that was a 3x5 foot flag that was on the ground that people had the option and choice of standing on or not standing on as they interacted with the work. And because of this, it was not so much what I thought about the flag or even what I thought about patriotism, but is what people, the audience, thought about it. And you could write in it, but you could also read what other people thought. And so the work became the center of national controversy over its transgressive use of the flag. It got to the point where George Bush, the president, George Herbert Walker Bush, publicly called the work disgraceful, which I thought was a tremendous honor. And the Congress outlawed it. It's like they thought it was so dangerous what I was saying that I was an unknown art student in a Midwestern art school in Chicago, and they wanted to ban this work. And so that was the work. But the thing is, the work looked at what is America, what is this country, and what is U.S. patriotism. And, I think some people somewhat misunderstand the work. They think it's about showing the strength of America and the freedom of speech. And actually, it was actually a work looking at patriotism and specifically what U.S. patriotism means. This is a flag in a country that is dripping with blood and dripping with blood of the people. And humanity can do so much better than that. And I do think that it is important to look at what patriotism in this country means, but also at this time, it's particularly complicated because this country is looking at people and saying, look, you are not an American. You are not part of this, regardless of whether people were born here or not. This government, and Trump in particular, the MAGA movement, is actually targeting immigrants and targeting migrants, hardworking people trying to feed their families, people that are not criminals, and, it's like the criminals that are targeting people that are not criminals. Trump is a convicted felon. But the people that are just, maybe they crossed a border without papers, maybe they came here seeking asylum, whatever, but these are people that are hardworking. And this country right now, as it's sort of making a drive towards fascism, is saying that these people do or don't, deciding who does or does not belong as an American. And specifically, Trump is targeting the 14th Amendment, which was specifically written after the Civil War to say that anybody that's born on American soil is an American citizen. And so it was specifically to resolve the question of enslavement and that Africans and Afro-descendant people were actually indeed citizens of the U.S. And so this was something that people, especially African and Afro-descendant people, fought for and sacrificed tremendously to be part of this, to have the rights of citizens, which means the rights of human beings. And now this government is trying to strip that right away, perhaps through executive order or other means. And so looking at patriotism, that is a big question, and this work focuses on that. But I don't think the resolution is to be celebratory of America. I think America is a country that has committed tremendous crimes. And while I think people should have the rights to be able to determine whether they're here or not, now have all laws, including constitutional guarantees, applied to them, I think we need to look towards a future where we can get beyond an America which is based on exploitation and oppression.
It's funny. There's a comedian, Roy Wood Jr. I don't know if you're familiar. He's from Chicago,
he's
right?
Yeah. I don't know if he's from Chicago. I know him.
No, he might not be from. You're right. He might not be from Chicago. You're right. But he did a joke.
I don't know.
He did a joke one time, and he said, he's like, you ever go into a town and it's just like full of American flags? He's like, I feel a little uneasy.
Yeah.
And then he said a joke. He said the punchline was, how many American flags equal one Confederate flag?
Going back to the how different people see the flag differently. What is the proper way to display a U.S. flag? It solicited all sorts of people's opinions. So one person wrote, that basically, I'm a German girl. If we Germans carried on about our flag the way you all do, we'd be called Nazis again. That's very heavy. Another person wrote, you're basically, you should be shot and your family should be made to pay for the bullets, and then went on to say, what do you expect from a named Dred Scott? And so this was very much coaching his patriotism in white supremacy and racism. And then another person wrote in that the police killed their brother, shot their brother, and then walked over and kicked over the body to, quote, make sure that he was dead, unquote. And then said something really insightful. That cop wore the flag on their shoulder, their arm. And so that person was seeing very directly that the police who murdered her brother was a representative of this government, of America, and that it was also a representative of racism and white supremacy. And so people do view the flag very differently. But the thing that was interesting about this work is it gave people like that, whose voices are normally shut out of conversations about what patriotism is, the ability to say, look, this is why I'm not patriotic. This is what actually this country has done to me and people like me. And so, I think it is important to have these conversations about what is patriotism, but it's also very important to have the voices of people who, as Malcolm X would have said, are the victims of America, and the victims of Americanism. Give them the ability to speak on this question. And that's actually what's, potentially profoundly liberating in this moment. If you want to talk about what America is, let's have that conversation, because it has, brutalized so many people across so much time that it would be an interesting conversation to have a fair discussion about what America and American patriotism is.
Where we at today is wild, because a lot of the rights that, I'm a first generation, right? First generation Chicano, Mexican American kid, right? My parents came from Mexico, right? And through learning about the history, civil rights history, Black and brown history, trans and queer history in the United States, much of the quote unquote freedoms that we have today, right, are because people fought for those things, right? Because this country was predicated, right, on slavery, was predicated on discrimination, was predicated, on division and inequality. And a lot of what we have today, right, the way I was even able to go to school today, right, was because in 1946 you had the Mendez case, and you had a Puerto Rican and Mexican families come together and fight so their kid could go to a school which was an all-white school. They won that case. That case then was taken on by
supported Brown,
right? What helped Brown versus Board of Education, right? And it was because families got together and be like, no, this ain't right, right? If we're talking about justice and liberty for all, then this inequality ain't right. And I think about like today, where folks are being like, we've had folks who are being snatched up on the street, families who are being targeted for how they look, right? Who are being racially profiled today, right? And then but we've done that before. We did that with the Japanese, with Japanese internment. We did it with Operation Wetback and Mexican repatriation. We did it with the Chinese Exclusion Acts. And we did the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. That if you were a slave and you were able to escape up to the north, you had bounty hunters that can go and find you, because there was a bounty on your head, and they could find you and bring you back to the south, right? And today we have bounty hunters who are hunting down folks who look brown, right? Who look immigrants. And I'm just, and again, with the banning of books and exclusion of history, we're seeing the repeat of history, right? And so my question to you, brother, is how have you seen these immigration raids? And then what do you feel the work that artists should be doing in this time to address some of these issues?
Yeah. Well, I think it is right to call them, bounty hunters, but also they're like slave catchers. I mean, when I see, masked, hooded ICE cowards storming into communities, like, jumping out of unmarked vans and busting people's windows and showing up at a Home Depot or something where day laborers are hanging out trying to get work, or where people are, cutting some rich person's lawn or something like that. They're like slave catchers. That's what it looked like to me. I mean, the uniforms have changed and the technologies claim they ain't riding a horse. They're in a car, but it's like and what's also shameful is sometimes they're like Black and Latino guys that are doing this. I mean, their mama ought to slap them. I'm sorry. It's like, it's like, you Mexican man, what the hell are you doing locking up other Mexicans, capturing Salvadorans, going and getting Colombians? What the hell's wrong with you? Don't, and you got to go home to family and face them. How dare these people do that? They, and it's like, and the reason they're doing it is like they're poor. People are poor, and Trump and his people are saying, here's a $50,000 sign-in bonus. And some of those people are reluctantly doing it. And some of them like, oh, wait, I get to beat up people and nobody's going to stop me from doing that. That sounds like a pretty good deal. I mean, it's like, let's be real. This is a country that has a lot of violence in it. And to give some people a license to wear a mask and beat somebody up, some people are inspired by that.
And you give me $50K, right?
Yeah.
And you give me $50K?
Yeah. It's like, and so, but I think that, when looking at that and seeing, well, if you thought slavery was wrong, then you got to think that this is wrong. If you think slave catchers are wrong, you got to think that this is wrong. And hopefully, and, I think there've been situation where a lot of people are looking at this. I mean, in Los Angeles and North Carolina and Chicago, people have been standing up in really courageous ways at great risk, blowing whistles, but throwing tear gas back at these ICE people, surrounding their cars, making it so they can't just snatch people off the streets
Yeah,
easily.
yeah, yeah.
And that's been really courageous. But well, you asked, what do artists do? I mean, I'm part of an initiative called Fall of Freedom, where I and other artists got together, and people that are arts presenters said, the artists need to have the freedom and capacity to show work that talks about these times. And so we've called for, on November 21st and 22nd of this year, there to be a flowering and a wave of culture going out to our audiences, not like a demonstration, which is important as those are. This is having people, authors read in libraries. It's fine artists show paintings on walls. It's musicians singing, in concert halls, the big cities and big concert venues, but also in small towns, professional people, but also amateur. There are, we've got people like, John Legend and Ava DuVernay and Michael Moore that are presenting, but there are also students like, in the ACA student lounge in Birmingham, Alabama, just a bunch of students are doing an open mic session, and you've got, there's a, Memory and Black Futures, a panel discussion at Next Haven in New Haven, Connecticut. There's Baltimore's having a band called the War on Women play. And so there are all these, people that are stepping up and saying, we actually need to make work and show work against fascism and against censorship. And one of the things is there's a tremendous censorship going on in the art, when even very well loved artists like Amy Sherrill, who had a major show at the Smithsonian Museum, that she had to cancel that show because they weren't going to let her show one painting in particular, which was a painting of a trans woman holding up a torch like the Statue of Liberty. And so, even these beloved artists that, and like Jeffrey Gibson, he represented the United States. He's a queer indigenous artist, but he represented the United States at a major art fair called the Venice Biennale last year. He was the U.S. representative, and yet when he was having a show that was funded by the National Endowment for the Art, they took that grant away because this new administration said they don't want to fund artists like that, and yet he was representing this country, just a few months before. And so, it's a time when us artists have to say, we have to fight, but also fight including against the censorship, and largely the censorship which is supporting and reinforcing the fascism that's here. The NEA has been defunded. The National Public Radio has been defunded. You've got situations where the Smithsonian museums have to submit all their exhibitions and wall signage to be reviewed by the White House. The Kennedy Center has been taken over by Trump, and a board of loyal lackeys have been put in place. This is having tremendous devastating qualities and problems for a lot of artists. Shows have been canceled, but the thing is, the shows that have been canceled are because the art that we do matters. And this kind of art is a threat to American fascism. And so we need to find ways to defend that so that we can have people, celebrating this joyful art and find joy in these dark times.
Yeah. I always think about what Nina Simone said about freedom. She said, freedom is no fear, right? Like, I know I'm free when I have no fear.
Yeah.
And I think about that a lot,
yeah.
Because I think these are scary times, brother.
Yeah.
Right? And there's a lot of fear-filled times. And I feel like, what can artists do in these times to really promote the idea of having no fear?
Well, the thing is, I think that right now we're not going to get to no fear. We can be courageous, because if you've got a government that doesn't even respect its laws, that doesn't respect due process, that is just kidnapping people and as quickly as possible sending them off to El Salvador or Djibouti without review, that's in violation of what judges are saying, hey, you can't deport this person, I've got a judicial order, and where the government just ignores that, where the government is ignoring rulings about deploying troops, where the government is just running roughshod at, firing people in the Justice Department. It's like, it's not every day that I will be a great defender of the Justice Department, which has, done tremendous harm across time. But when people were standing up and saying, no, this law has to be based on evidence and fact, and people have to adhere to the law. And when the government is saying, we don't have to do that anymore, people should be scared, but people should be courageous. Courage is the ability to act in the face of fear. And so these are scary times, but what we need to do is have people be courageous and say, I know they might come after me. I know they might harm me, but I'm going to stand up because it's the right thing to do. And I'm going to rally other people to do that. So with Fall of Freedom, we've said, art matters and courage is contagious. We want to spread courage. We need people that can see clearly that there are not only government thugs, but also wannabe government thugs. These people that are getting this $50,000 signing bonus to be ICE agents. I mean, it's like, they're people that want that, and some of them aren't hired. You've got people that are just pretend walking around in masks, and just like, I'm just going to show up at a place and jack up some, Latino people. That's happening, and so, I think that, you've got these other, much more open Nazis that are, like on campuses terrorizing fellow students and stuff. And so people are right to be scared, but we actually need to say those people represent the worst of society and not where we want to go. And we need to challenge that and take them on in all sorts of ways. And, it's inspiring when I've even seen activists saying what's needed right now is to drive out the Trump regime, that they're organizing people to come to DC and try and actually nonviolently get this regime to collapse, much the way, happened in South Korea with Park Ji-hung, where she was driven from power, or in, Puerto Rico, where the governor was forced out because of all the protests, or in Bangladesh, where where the recent prime minister for years was forced out. And so, or the Arab Spring, where Mubarak was driven from power by people, showing up in Tahrir Square. And so, I think that those are the kinds of things that people need to do. But that takes tremendous courage and takes solidarity. And it takes bringing people together, and art can be part of that.
Yes. What is your hope for the Fall of Freedom, and how artists can create hope in these times?
Yeah. Well, Fall of Freedom started 3 months ago. It was me reaching out to a few artist friends of mine and said, hey, there's both a need, because I'm seeing all these, schools and lawyers trying to make individual deals with a fascist mob boss. And I've seen The Godfather. I know that doesn't work very well. I've seen movies about Nazis that don't work very well. Yeah. And so, we need to stand up. But then we said, well, this is an emergency situation. How can we get artists to do something on a big scale that could, sort of send up a flare that we need to resist? And we said, okay, well, we could do something powerful in 3 months. Now that's insane. You don't do a nationwide sort of organizing of hundreds of artists, which right now there are over 550 art spaces, again, from 10,000 seat concert halls down to small libraries, from Alaska down to Florida, from New York across to Los Angeles. You don't do that in 3 months, especially if you don't have any organization in place, you don't have any money in place. You just have 10 artists or 12 artists gathering in my studio. And yet we were able to tap into what people felt a real need for and say, yes, you should be part of this. Run with it. Do it yourself. It's decentralized. You don't need permission. You just need to act. This is not all organized out of my studio. Far from it. This is more, we created a infrastructure and an idea that people found very resonant. Yeah. And, they are acting all across the country. In Florida, in Pompeo Beach, there's a Black Friday, which is kind of like an open mic thing. There's a band practice in Colorado. There's, a cabaret, the musical cabaret is being performed by the Oakland Community Theater, and Asheville Community Theater is doing something. There are all sorts of people, as I get, from, as I said, John Legend and Michael Moore down to these community theaters and stuff, that people are not super professional actors. They're, banned books readings that are happening in places that are, people are just like, I want to be able to read 1984 or the 1619 Project or the Handmaid's Tale, which are all being ripped out of libraries. And so, it doesn't even take a tremendous amount of professional expertise. It just takes a desire and an understanding that art and culture matters. And so we
Yes.
were able to get all sorts of people to sign on. And I think there will be lots more. I mean, we're still, people are rebranding and repackaging events that they already had planned. I mean, if you're a mainstream museum, you plan your schedule 3 years in advance. And so if somebody comes along 2 months ago and says, hey, we want you to do a Fall of Freedom thing, that you can't take down the show that you got planned, but you can say, oh, we've got this show that's very appropriate. Can we say that that's part of Fall of Freedom? And our response was, yes, that's what people should do. And likewise, some people are saying this is an emergency. We're going to change up our plans. We're going to have this open mic reading, or we're going to have this theater, which is going to have a curtain speech. I mean, major theaters like the Goodman Theater in Chicago, Arena Stage in DC, Public Theater in New York, but also many, many major theaters are having their actors read a specific speech about Fall of Freedom at the end of the show to give hope to the audience, but also to help organize the actors. The ACLU is getting on board. They've got a concert that's happening in Brooklyn that's going to have people like Sheryl Crow and St. Vincent and others performing. That's going to be part of Fall of Freedom. So that was already scheduled, and they're like, yeah, this should be
They
part
want
of
to be
Fall of Freedom.
They want to be part of it.
Yeah.
I love it. Brother Scott, one question. Is Fall of Freedom an ongoing project? And is this something that's going to continue?
Yes, but we don't know how. I mean, this was created on an emergency basis by a bunch of people, just a few people getting together in my studio. And we feel a tremendous responsibility to carry that need forward, and to the people that have come forward. When we started, it was a few people, and now it's, hundreds of places, over 550 right now, and it will probably be more than that soon. People feel a need to stand up to this fascist administration and this regime. And so we need to have conversations about how it's going to continue. It definitely will continue in some form. Will it be after the fall or spring into action? I don't know yet, but there definitely will be something, because people really feel a need for this, and we feel a tremendous responsibility to support what we've unleashed.
All right, brother. Thank you so much. And I'll see you in the streets.
Yeah. Peace.
Gracias, Brother Scott. Dread's work reminds us that culture doesn't just reflect the world, it shapes it. You see, we're all connected in the struggle. It isn't just about immigrants. We're all part of the same fabric. Alongside the artists, we're also the fighters in the courts, in the policy battles, and on the front lines of immigrant justice. To help us ground this conversation, we're joined by Raja Walla, VP of Strategy and Partnership at the National Immigration Law Center. Raja leads NILC's work at the intersection of legal strategy, narrative power, and organizing, fighting for immigrant dignity, safety, and due process on the national scale. Raja, welcome back, brother, to the Freedom to Thrive podcast.
Thank you so much, Hector. Glad to be with you.
Hey, Raja, you were listening to the conversation with Dred Scott, lay out the reality of raids, fear, state violence, and also how artists can help fight in this time. We're seeing people detained, deported, disappeared without due process, citizens and non-citizens. Trump is escalating his attacks as we speak. He's going after constitutional rights. Right now, there's attacks on birthright citizenship, and even removing people as they're going into nationalization ceremonies. Can you share a little bit about why is going after birthright citizenship so dangerous for all of us right now?
Well, first of all, Hector, I mean, I think you nailed it. This is really an unprecedented time in our country's history. And the real key lesson here that I think we all have to keep in mind is that, yes, you're right. It starts with an attack on a certain community, Black folk, brown folk, maybe someone who looks a little bit different, maybe someone who speaks a little bit different, walks a little bit different, talks a little bit different, right? But that is that's just a starting point. And then eventually you wake up one day, and it might be tomorrow, it might be next week, it might mean next year. And you find out that this government is targeting anyone who disagrees with their views. And I think that's what's so powerful about Dred Scott's story, is that he challenged the very core of what it means to be a responsible American. And he came out there and he said, yeah, you can burn the flag. In fact, the right way to display the flag is whatever way you want to display the flag, right? And so I am really shocked and appalled that this administration is going after the very core of the 14th Amendment of our Constitution, birthright citizenship, which, by the way, was a core principle behind righting the wrongs of slavery. I think we all know a little bit about where this came from in our Constitution, but this was the idea that, you know what, we as a country, as a government, enslaved Africans, and then to right that wrong, we were going to say, well, at least you get the privilege and the benefit, the constitutional right of citizenship. Yeah. Well, they want to kind of take that all away now. And so that's really what we're dealing with here. And it shouldn't be surprising, but it sure as hell is still shocking to a lot of us who are on the front lines fighting against this stuff.
You know, there's a saying in Spanish that says, cuando le conviene, which means like, oh, when it serves you, you know, because this administration, right, this Trump administration, they use the Constitution, right, to push forward crazy racist policies, you know, and they'll hang up the Constitution. And other times they literally violate everything on the Constitution. They use it, you know, when it serves them, and when it doesn't matter, right? They don't have to listen to it. It's kind of wild what's going on right now, you know. And I'm grateful that Nilk and folks like you are doing this work right now. Can you share some of the democracy work you and Nilk are working on right now?
Absolutely. One of the key things that we're pushing forward right now is challenging this unprecedented notion that the military could be deployed onto American streets, ostensibly for immigration enforcement, for dealing with crime, etc. But we all know that's a fig leaf. We all know that the real purpose here is to intimidate, to sow fear and division among the populace, right? And so we've got a case in court challenging the military deployments in Memphis. We've also got a really practical solidarity guide that will be coming out in the coming weeks and months to outline steps that every single American, any single person here in the United States can take to challenge the rise of authoritarianism. I think there's a sense here that's like, oh, well, what can I do? You know, I'm sick and tired of waiting for Congress to take action. Well, there are steps you can take. You can join community organizations. You can join your mutual aid group. Heck, you could start a mutual aid group, right? And we outline those steps that people can take. There's a lot more in the hopper. Happy to, you know, discuss it. But we're getting ready to go here. We're already going to challenge this administration's authoritarian crackdown, and you'll be hearing a lot more about it in the coming days and weeks.
Question for you, my friend. For listeners who are listening, some folks might be scared, angry, pissed off, but like also ready to act. In your opinion, what are some of the most effective ways people can stand with immigrant communities right now?
Well, the most important thing that any ally can do right now is to speak out. Because one thing that we're not quite aware of, but you heard this really demonstrated in your interview with Dred Scott, is that the power of your voice is infinitely more powerful in a scenario in which the authoritarian is trying to silence the people. And you may be, depending on your situation, depending on your background, but depending on your circumstances, you may have a certain amount of privilege that those who are undocumented or those who maybe are on the front lines of protests for Gaza or any number of populations that are being targeted by this administration don't have. And it is, I think, a privilege to be able to wield that privilege that you have to stand up, speak out. If you see something, ICE abusing a undocumented immigrant, speak up. Share that story. Make sure to follow up, ensure that they got a lawyer, make sure they're not disappeared. We're seeing folks disappeared off the streets, right? And so that's the step number one, is to speak up. And then there's sort of many other steps. You can walk up that ladder of engagement to really put more time, effort, energy, money into this project of defending our democracy, starting from that point. But first and foremost, I think we're taught this as kids. We sometimes forget it as adults. But when you see something that's wrong, when you see an injustice, you got to speak up.
Boom, 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 boom. You know, last thing, I think there's a misconception, right? Right now, Latinos are being targeted, but they're not the only targets. I mean, right now, Somalians are being targeted right now. Before that, we saw Palestinian activists being targeted. We see Muslims being targeted. And so, like, this is the time to really be building a front of solidarity. In your work, Raha, how can we bring diverse groups together and build on solidarity for change, in your opinion?
Well, I couldn't agree more, Hector. I'm from Minnesota originally, where there's one of the largest Somali populations in the world outside of Somalia. I come from a Muslim family. I myself am a brown bearded guy, and so I could definitely speak from life experience that there's no limit to populations and minority groups, historically disadvantaged groups, or anyone who just expresses a contrary opinion, frankly, that this administration is going to choose to target. And I think you mentioned it, the key word, which is solidarity. We've got to stick together. We've got to understand that every person's struggle, whether we've experienced that same struggle or not, is our struggle. Because that is how there's power in numbers, there's power in community, there's power in, there's a convening power in getting together to say this is our project to rebuild this democracy that is being chipped away at day by day by this administration. And so I think that there's, spaces for people to be able to get together. NILC is trying to host those spaces to bring different organizations and coalitions together across issue sets, across different communities, across different backgrounds. And so you just really, I gotta say, you nailed it there in terms of that key concept of solidarity. And that's the only way we're going to get through this.
And that's it, brother. Thank you so much, Raha, for coming on, sharing your wisdom, your knowledge, your organizing work. For people who want to get more information, go to nilc.org, nilc.org. They have kick-ass information, not only for your city specifically, but they have information and know your rights information for national work. So thank you so much, Raha. Brother, I will see you in the struggle, homie. Gracias.
Thank you so much, Hector.
All right, peace. Familia, that was Raha Wala, long hair, don't care, man. That beautiful man is on the front lines of protecting our people. Thank you so much, homie. So Dread and Raha reminds us that courage is contagious, that power is real. You know what's more contagious than COVID? Courage. You know what's more contagious than COVID? Solidarity. So if you take anything from this conversation, let it be this: we are more courageous together. Silence is not safety, and solidarity is not an option. That's how we're going to move forward. To learn how to take action, support immigrant communities, and stand against repression, visit NILC.org. I'm Hector Flores, and this is Freedom to Thrive. Thanks for listening to the episode of NILC's Freedom to Thrive podcast: Resistance, Justice, Resilience. To learn more about the work NILC is doing, visit nilc.org, and don't forget to subscribe for future episodes.